joining us for this webinar. And thank you also for your interest in the Southern HIV Impact Fund. We will give a brief overview of the fund as well as the recently released requests for proposals today. My name is Melanie Powers, and I'm the Program Manager for the Southern HIV Impact Fund here at AIDS United. Before we continue, we want to thank Gilead Sciences, Ford Foundation, Elton John AIDS Foundation, and Beeve Healthcare, our funders for the Southern HIV Impact Fund. We also want to thank funders concerned about AIDS for convening this group of funders motivated to create leveraged impact on the HIV epidemic in the U.S. South. Without FCAA and the funders, we would not be able to have this incredible initiative. We appreciate their generosity and them allowing us to serve as the fund manager, expanding and enhancing our work in the South. We have placed the webinar in listen-only mode. You can listen via your computer or phone, whichever you prefer. The call-in information is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you have a question, please use the question and answer box in the lower hand portion of your screen. We are also recording the webinar and will make it available on the AIDS United website. As I've already mentioned, my name is Melanie Powers, and I joined AIDS United 1 month ago as the Program Manager for the HIV Southern Impact Fund. I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I currently live and work in Atlanta, Georgia. I am also joined today by Senior Program Manager Liam Cabal.
Thanks, Melanie. This is Liam. I'm with AIDS United. I'm a Senior Program Manager here, and I've been with the organization for 6 years. And during that 6 years, I've worked on our Southern initiatives, first Southern Reach, and now I'm part of the team here. And we're really excited to have this opportunity to share this new funding opportunity with you.
Thank you, Liam. So during today's meeting, we will do a brief overview of AIDS United as a whole and the Southern HIV Impact Fund grant-making initiative. We will then cover who is eligible to apply, the requirements of the grant, and types of available funding. After that, we will briefly discuss some important cross-cutting areas of focus of this funding initiative, and we will also briefly discuss the technical assistance opportunities for this grant. We will then spend some time going over restrictions around lobbying and how lobbying should be noted on your budget, should it be a part of your budget. We will then cover the rest of the required attachments, and after that, we'll go over the steps that need to be taken to access the Foundation Connect system. And finally, we will review the application timeline and grant year. AIDS United's mission is to end the AIDS epidemic in the United States, and we seek to fulfill our mission through strategic grant making, capacity building, policy advocacy, technical assistance, and formative research. To date, we have directly funded more than $98 million to local communities and have leveraged more than $115 million in additional support for programs that include access to care for people living with HIV, capacity building for community-based organizations, HIV prevention, advocacy, syringe access, and more. The lives of people living with or at risk of HIV cannot be siloed into one issue area. The Southern HIV Impact Fund was created to increase Southern-based HIV work that addresses disparities in the epidemic and intersection systems of oppression that are driving those disparities. The desired outcomes of this initiative set forth by the funding collaborative are as follows. Increase collaborative efforts across the U.S. South to end HIV and reduce health disparities, catalyze a demonstrable increase in leadership in the U.S. South that is more reflective of the regional HIV epidemic while also providing support to current leaders, and increase resources to the South both through technical assistance and grant making. The Southern HIV Impact Fund brings a strategic focus to HIV prevention, care and support services, and policy advocacy and movement building in the U.S. South. The fund will support work in and across these three focal areas, and we hope that some applicants will consider applying under more than one. In addition to financial awards, the fund will also provide in-depth coaching, mentoring, and technical assistance to grantees. It is our intention and that of the funders to ensure that a range of organizations receive assistance that they identify as critical in increasing their capacity to do intersectional HIV work in their community. Through this collaborative, the funders will be able to support a robust pipeline of diverse leadership development that is not possible through single-source grant making. Now we will quickly go over the eligibility and grant requirements. Only one application per organization may be submitted for consideration. Applicants must be a nonprofit tax-exempt organization per the guidelines set forth by the IRS. Appropriate verification of this federal status must be provided. However, those organizations that do not hold a 501c3 status may apply through a fiscal sponsor. Organizations should be viable with or without the grant. These funds are not intended to help start new organizations or serve as a replacement for discontinued funding. Funds received under this initiative should not make up the majority of the organization's overall operating budget. Organizations may apply for funding up to $100,000, and we hope to award between 30 and 35 grants. The overall amount that we intend to grant out is approximately $2.7 million. Applicants must be able to utilize the grant funds within the 12-month period beginning December 1st, 2017 and ending November 30th, 2018. An interim report will be due halfway through the year and will require the completion of a budget expenditures report for half the grant year, and a final report will be due January 15th, 2019 after the end of the grant year. Additionally, a cohort-wide grantee convening will take place in February 2018, and where at least one individual from each organization, likely either the project lead or the organization's leader, will be required to attend. AIDS United will cover all the costs associated with attendance of that meeting, including airfare, lodging, and most expenses. Only proposals focused on HIV prevention, care and support services, or policy advocacy and movement building will be considered. Efforts focused on medical treatment provision are not eligible for funding under this RFP. The Southern HIV Impact Fund will support grants under two categories: general operating support and project-specific support. Organizations requesting general operating support must be able to demonstrate an understanding and history of intersecting HIV and social justice work. A work plan and project budget will not be required. However, organizations will need to demonstrate how funding will be used to advance or improve work in one or more of the three funding focal areas. Requests for general operating support must contain realistic and clearly articulated benchmarks for how success will be measured. Applicants requesting project-specific support must be able to demonstrate a history of working within their proposed population and must also have substantive experience in either HIV-focused or social justice work. Those with a social justice focus may apply under this category for a project that integrates HIV into their existing work, and equally, applicants that are working in HIV but who may not necessarily have experience in applying an intersectional framework can apply to support a project that addresses HIV from a social justice approach. Organizations seeking project-specific funding will need to provide a work plan and project budget. We strongly encourage applicants to review the parameters for each funding type and assess whether it makes more sense for your organization to apply for general operating or project-specific support. The expectation for general operating support requests is that the applicant demonstrates a clear history of work in HIV and social justice, so it is very important to realistically assess which option is better suited for your organization. Only organizations located within the Southern HIV Impact Fund catchment area shown here are eligible for funding. This area aligns with the most impacted states of the southern region, and these states are Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. Southern HIV Impact Fund applicants must exhibit an explicit commitment to address HIV as a racial or social justice issue, apply an intersectional approach when developing and implementing strategies, for example, addressing intersections between forms or systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination, and they must also practice meaningful involvement of people living with HIV/AIDS. Through this new initiative, AIDS United will continue its focus on the application of an intersectional social justice approach to HIV. Intersectionality is a framework for understanding how interrelated systems of oppression support discrimination among people who share overlapping social identities. Through engagement with the broader social justice movement, grantees under this initiative will go beyond traditional HIV advocacy, prevention, and care by addressing HIV-related disparities where they meet, at the intersection of public health and social justice. Increasing prevention efforts and accessing diverse community entry points for disseminating sexual and reproductive health information and resources must happen beyond only traditional HIV providers. We encourage applicants to view this RFP as an opportunity to establish or enhance efforts to address HIV in tandem with any number of intersecting systems of oppression. And given that, we encourage civil rights and social justice groups without a previous history of HIV advocacy to apply. The technical assistance component of the Southern HIV Impact Fund is a partnership between grantees and AIDS United. Some non-HIV specific organizations may require assistance in building their knowledge of HIV issues and systems, and some HIV organizations may need support with strengthening their understanding of HIV as a social justice issue. Some examples of technical assistance include coalition building across HIV and social justice issues, integrating social or racial justice into HIV work and organizational culture, integrating HIV into advocacy work and organizational culture, developing a strategic advocacy campaign, community organizing, voter engagement, strengthening overall development, and even technical assistance specific to the needs of legal services providers. TA may be administered via a number of different methods, including in-person meetings, conference calls, and webinars. And applicants can make technical assistance requests in the application and do not need to limit it to the areas that I've mentioned or those that are suggested in the RFP. You can request TA around any areas related to your work, to the work that you are proposing. It may also come as a condition of the grant award based on recommendations of the External Review Committee. Please note that any technical assistance offered or required is provided in addition to the monetary grant award at no cost to the grantee. TA does not need to be factored into the budget, so related expenses should not be included as a line item. One technical assistance component of the fund that we are particularly excited about is a focus on leadership development. The funding partners and AIDS United are committed to strengthening and increasing the leadership of those most representative of the epidemic in the region, but who are least represented in traditional leadership positions. Oh, I did, yes, I'm sorry. I thought I may not have adjusted the slide, but I did. So to continue, applicants may recommend a current or emerging leader at their organization, including the person writing the application, to participate in a year-long leadership development training that includes cohort learning with in-person and virtual meetings, as well as one-on-one individualized training and coaching. Those selected for the training cohort will be from funded organizations, and a portion of that leader's salary is able to be included in the grant, even if that individual is not working on the project that is being funded. Should applicants choose to make changes to legislative policy, it is very possible that lobbying will be needed. So we would like to cover some information about lobbying. Now, the information that is about to be provided can be found at the end of the RFP. However, we strongly recommend that you review any concerns you may have about lobbying with your organization's attorney. First, we'll cover the definition and types of lobbying, and then address how this impacts the application and budget. Lobbying is attempting through communications with legislators or the public to influence specific legislation, whether pending or proposed. There are two types of lobbying, direct and grassroots. Direct lobbying is a communication with a federal, state, or local legislator, staffer, or other official participating in the legislative process that refers to specific legislation and that takes a position on that legislation. Grassroots lobbying is a communication with the public that refers to specific legislation, reflects a view on that legislation, and includes a call to action, except in specific cases when a call to action isn't necessary. It is very important to note that there are some exceptions to the definitions of lobbying. I will go over a few here, but we encourage you to review the full list and explanations at the end of the RFP. Most communications with executive branch officials are not lobbying for purposes of tax regulations. A communication with an executive branch official is direct lobbying only if the communication refers to and takes a position on specific legislation, but not executive branch enforcement or interpretation action. And the primary purpose of the communication is to influence legislation. For example, preparing testimony for an executive branch official for hearings on that proposed legislation. Executive action, judicial processes, or the work of administrative agencies, whether elected or appointed, are not determined to be legislation. Attempts to influence the actions of regulatory agencies are accordingly entirely protected, even where the agency is primarily concerned with promulgating regulations to effectuate legislative mandates. Communications addressing broad social, economic, and similar issues are excluded from the definitions of lobbying, even if the issues discussed are the subject of pending legislation, but the communication may not refer to specific legislation. It is not lobbying to make materials available that present a sufficiently full and fair exposition of a public policy issue to allow the public to form its own conclusions about the issue. This is true even if the materials both refer to and take a position on a specific legislative proposal. To qualify for this exception, materials distributed to the public may not include a call to action and may not be distributed only to people interested in one side of the issue. Again, we encourage you to review the last section of the RFP for additional exceptions as well as further details about lobbying. Please note, however, that information included in this webinar and the RFP is not meant to replace the recommendations or advice of an attorney. Southern HIV Impact Fund awards may not be used for lobbying, whether direct lobbying or grassroots lobbying. To that end, those applicants choosing to pursue legislative policy changes that will likely include lobbying activities are expected to have funds allocated from a separate source than the Southern HIV Impact Fund. Those applicants will also be required to note this on their project budget in the form of using a separated budget structure outlining which funds will be used for the lobbying activities. The project budget template is provided through the online system. For your reference, a screenshot of the template is shown on your screen right now. It is very important to note that organizations applying for general operating support instead of project-specific support will need to state in their application that the funds provided through the grant will not be used for lobbying purposes. In addition to the section of the project budget for noting separate funds for lobbying, the project budget workbook includes space to give detailed justification, the fringe rate, and the indirect rate, which cannot exceed 20%. Project budgets are required for project-specific requests for funding. Applications for general operating support do not require the submission of a project budget. Be sure to read the Instructions tab to fully understand how to complete the budget workbook. Also, please note that only the yellow cells of the workbook should be completed. Please provide the organization's operating budget for the current fiscal year. This must be the budget being used by the time of submission. So 2017 if your budget aligns with the calendar year, or 2016-17 or 2017-18 depending on the budget time period your organization uses. You are required to submit your most recent audit. If you do not yet have your 2016 audit, you are required to submit your 2015 audit. In the case where you have a fiscal sponsor, please submit the fiscal sponsor's audit. We may accept an organization's 990 depending on the size of the organization's budget. And please do contact us directly with questions about acceptable documents. A list of the organization's board of directors with professional or community affiliations is required as well. And as for the organizational chart, it needs to show all staff positions within the organization on one page. The diversity table referenced in the RFP can be downloaded from the Foundation Connect system as well as on the AIDS United website. And lastly, any MOAs or letters of support should also be uploaded to the system. To begin an application, go to the Southern HIV Impact Fund RFP webpage and click the button labeled Start Written Application. You will then be asked to complete the application eligibility quiz, which is a series of 3 questions to determine the organization's eligibility. Once you complete the eligibility quiz, you will come to this page. If your organization has ever used the Foundation Connect system to apply for a grant through AIDS United, for example, Transgender Leadership Initiative, Syringe Access, Southern Reach, POP, or Sector Transformation, or if your organization has used the system to submit reports such as for access to care or retention in care, then your organization will have an existing account. Be sure to use those login credentials. If you're not sure you have a login, please email me at mpowers@aidsunited.org. If you know your username but can't remember your password, click Can't Access Your Account to reset your password. If your organization has neither applied for a grant nor submitted reports to AIDS United using this system, click Register to create a new account. Before doing so, be sure to bookmark the login page. And once you have created an account, be sure to save your username and password so you can return to your open applications. The application may be accessed using the link provided in the RFP or by going to the Funding Opportunities page of the main AIDS United website. Applications will be due on September 29th by 5 p.m. Eastern, which allows 6 weeks from the time of the RFP release to complete the application. As an alternative to a traditional application, organizations may schedule a phone or video conference call during which they will respond verbally to all narrative questions. We will send a summary of the interview, and organizations will have 24 hours to confirm the accuracy of the written summation. Required attachments must still be submitted via Foundation Connect in advance of the September 29th deadline. We strongly recommend submitting the application early to avoid or address any issues with technology. We also strongly recommend completing the application in a Word document and then copying and pasting into the Foundation Connect system. Approved applicants will be notified of funding in early November, and the negotiation of final targets along with execution of grant agreements will take place mid to late November. The grant year begins December 1st, 2017 and concludes November 30th, 2018. We intend to have a 2 to 3 day grantee convening sometime in February 2018. As for reporting, the interim report will be due on May 31st, 2018, and the final report due no later than January 15, 2019. We will now take any additional questions that you may have. You can, as I see some folks have been doing, you can ask a question by typing into the Q&A box in the bottom right corner of your screen. Please also feel free to email questions to southernfund@aidsunited.org.
At this time, we'll wait a minute or two so we can get some questions in and make sure that we are able to respond to you.
So we do have some questions coming in, so I will go ahead and read them aloud and may ask for other staff to answer. So we have a question, could you please provide your email address again? Yes, I can. It is MP as in Powers, OWERS @aidsunited.org. My first initial, last name @aidsunited.org. I have another question. Can general support fund be used for labs and meds under the care and support category? I'm going to allow Liam to answer that one.
Thanks for that question. We actually, because we cannot put funds toward medication or other medical care, we are not able to have your general operating support funds go to that.
Thank you, Liam. What is the percent of funding that AIDS United has given to larger metropolitan areas, a larger southern area with a significant increase in HIV/AIDS infections? Again, I am 1 month at AIDS United, so I'm going to give that one to Liam.
Thank you again. So we actually, it varies each year on whether we fund a lot of organizations in a particular state. As we mentioned in the RFP, we have an external review committee, and I believe we mentioned it in this as well. So that external review committee takes all of the applications received and decides based on the quality of the application as well as a number of other factors into consideration before we make a decision on what grantees and what region or what states or specific metropolitan areas get funded. There has not been a specific percentage that we need to fund in any one state. I believe we also will be adding the questions that you have here or integrating these responses that we have into the current FAQs that we have, as well as sending out some additional information. But that is to say that there is not a specific percentage that we allocate for any one state, any one metropolitan area. The epidemic and the rates of infection, as well as a number of other factors, do play into a decision around what organizations and regions get funded.
Thanks, Liam. So our next question is, how many general operating versus project-specific funds are available? We do not have a specific breakdown for general operating versus project-specific funding. However, as I mentioned, we do really encourage applicants to carefully review the RFP, specifically review the qualifications for applying for general operating versus project-specific report. For general operating funding, we will really be looking for organizations to demonstrate a history of doing intersectional HIV work. And so for those organizations who may have their experience primarily in either HIV or in social or racial justice, we would encourage those organizations to really look at project-specific funding. And I don't know if anyone else has anything to add, or Liam?
Thanks. I think you handled that exactly. And we do see a lot of questions, so if we're not able to get to all of them today, we will make sure that we email the responses out to everyone. I do see a question here that is asking about if multiple agencies are applying, one must be a primary. That's correct. How do we handle the diversity table in that case? And so you'll actually complete the diversity table for the primary applicant. So if there are two or more organizations together applying, then you would, that lead organization would be completing all of the necessary materials. That is, submitting the organizational budget, the audit, all of those things, and as well as completing the diversity table for that organization. I see another question about PrEP labs. Would the costs for PrEP labs be considered prophylaxis or treatment? That's actually a very specific question. I don't have an answer for you in the immediate sense, and so instead of me giving a very particularly, like a vague answer, I think it's better that if you would please reach out to us at southernfund@aidsunited.org, we'll be able to give a direct answer, and we will also include that in our frequently asked questions once we have a definitive answer. But thank you for that question. I see another question about what is the cap on the fringe rate and the indirect rate. So the indirect rate, the cap is 20%. Your fringe rate is determined by each individual organization. If we have questions individually about how high that fringe rate is, we will reach out to that applicant directly. However, we do not have a necessarily cap on fringe, but we do have a cap on indirect costs, and that's 20%. I see that there's some particular questions around accessing the online portal. I think it's best to handle those by sending an email directly to us. That way we can address any particular question that maybe, it may not be unique to you, but the way that we would want to make sure that we're able to do it is to walk you through any issues and go into our system to make sure there's not any errors on our end. So please feel free to email us at southernfund@aidsunited.org. I really appreciate this question about transportation. Transportation most certainly can be included in the budget. Thank you. Sorry, I was just reminded by a wonderful colleague to read the question. That would be helpful. So there was a question, would transportation to medical or HIV prevention services be considered a support service? Yes, it would be considered a support service, and you would be able to use your funds from the fund for that. Thank you.
So there is another question. We've got one that says, for community recruitment and trainings, is it feasible to use funds for space rental if needed, refreshments? Yes, unless Liam says no.
Yes.
Yes.
That's totally fine, yeah. So I see another question, excuse me. So does that mean labs and meds can be covered under any category, or is this just if asking for general support? For instance, if it's program specific for care navigation and support, can these funds be used for labs? So I actually appreciate the difference between labs and medications. I want to make sure that I'm giving the correct answer. So I did say labs and meds altogether earlier. That can't be used for that. I'm going to get clarification to make sure of that. I can tell you for sure that it cannot be used for purchase of medications, whether it's project-specific support or general operating support. This fund cannot provide funds to purchase medication. And I will let you know, we'll make sure that we update our FAQs as well as get a clarity response for the labs question.
I see a question that asks, will a copy of the slides be made available? Yes, they will. We will have them uploaded by tomorrow, and they will be available on the Southern HIV Impact Fund RFP webpage on the AIDS United website.
So I see a combination of questions. I'm going to read both of them together because I want to make sure I'm getting it fully. But we have a question about, can a Ryan White grantee from a large metropolitan area be a partner? And then I see another question that's very similar, somewhat at least. Does the collaboration with the I'm sorry, I just lost something. 1 second. Does the collaboration with the organization have to be directly involved in social justice if you are already an HIV-experienced organization? Can both organizations be involved in HIV-related services? So it's a couple of different things. I'm not 100% sure I understand the partner question as it relates to a Ryan White grantee. I know that a Ryan White grantee can apply for funds, and assumedly that Ryan White grantee can also be a collaborating partner with this with a primary applicant. So if you see a Ryan White grantee as a potential partner for this, then most certainly you can do that. It's still the funds that you receive cannot be used for the restricted things that we had just mentioned earlier. And then as it relates to that collaboration with the organization to have be directly involved in social justice if you're already an HIV experienced organization. The purpose of this fund is to get organizations that may not have as much experience in social justice or may not have as much experience in HIV work to work together to expand on those areas. And so while it's acceptable for you as an organization to apply, if you do not have social justice experience and you are not collaborating with another partner that does have social justice experience and work, it's appropriate, it's acceptable for you to apply, but we would strongly encourage you to understand the context under which you work and see how the social justice framework applies to the work that you're currently doing. We are expecting that every applicant understand the intersection of social justice and HIV. Ooh. So then there was a question of, can funds be used to help pay for medical visits? I think that that's a more specific question. It does sound like it's related to paying for medical services. I think that we should get clarity for you, but if it's paying for a physician to provide medical care, if it's paying for medication provision, there are certain things that it can't cover. So I think that in these particular cases, it would be very helpful for us for you to send an email to us and let us know what exactly you're proposing and so that we can give you a more clear answer on whether or not these funds can be used for what you're proposing.
And I see another question asking about how soon the recording and PowerPoint will be available for this call, and we will have them up by tomorrow.
I also want to mention that an email will go out to all of the participants when the slides and the recording go live. I see a question here on around PrEP services. So they're mentioning that the biggest barrier for PrEP services is that neither CDC nor Ryan White will cover the medical provider time to review labs and prescribe PrEP meds. Is this considered treatment or preventive services? We want PrEP. We want people to be able to access PrEP as well. I think that this is a very great question. I think I know we need to go back and get some clarity on whether or not the funds can be used to cover the medical provider's time to review labs and prescribe PrEP medication. We will let you know directly if you email us to southernfund@aidsunited.org. We will also do our best to make sure that this particular question gets addressed in an FAQ.
The next question I see is, do you have a social justice framework or model to reference regarding what this partnership could look like? We don't have a specific, we pull from different frameworks when constructing the RFP and how we were thinking about this. I don't have a specific framework to reference on this call. However, I can put something in the FAQ document and what will be sent out to you all with some more information. And if PJ, if you have, if you want to follow up with me via email about a specific idea or something specific to your organization, please do that also.
And I do want to add a little bit, thank you, Melanie, for that response. I do want to add that we have, through a previous funding initiative, Southern Reach, have supported organizations that work within HIV and work outside of HIV to do HIV work and or integrate social justice into their existing work. So I would strongly encourage you to check out our website to look at some of the organizations that have been previously funded to do some of this integrating some of the work that integrates the social justice framework into HIV. And that particular website that you want to check out is southernreach.aidsunited.org. It looks like we've made it through the questions. Thank you so much for all of your questions. We want to make sure that other folks don't have any additional questions, so please feel free to add your question into the Q&A box in the bottom right corner. Great. Well, it looks like those are all the questions that we have currently. We really appreciate you all taking the time to listen to this presentation about the RFP. We encourage you to read the RFP through thoroughly, but also we also encourage you to email us at southernfund@aidsunited.org if you have any additional questions. We're happy to assist with anything from accessing our system to getting clarifying answers for you for those questions. Otherwise, everyone have a fantastic day. We really appreciate your interest in the Southern HIV Impact Fund. Thank you.
Thank you.